Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Meaningful People podcast. So happy to have you here. This episode is powered by our friends at Collars & Co. You know those shirts that everyone's been wearing these days because of this podcast? Yeah, that is Collars & Co. So let's say it's summertime and you're going to the pool or you're going to a family gathering and everyone's wearing these short sleeve shirts. But you know what risk you have when you put on those short sleeve shirts? You risk your collar looking like you packed it away for the winter in a box and it's just never going to recover. Luckily, that doesn't happen with Collars & Co. shirts because the collar stays strong and firm, but the shirt feels like a t-shirt. This is like literally one of the most amazing shirts I've ever put on. I literally wear it every single day. They have so many different colors. I wear one for Shabbos. I wear one for during the week. I wear it on many podcasts, including the one that you're about to watch. So look closely. That is from collarsandco.com. Make sure to use promo code MEANINGFUL for 15% off. That's MEANINGFUL for 15% off. And of course, a big thank you to our friends at Alpert and Associates. You need life insurance. You need your finances looking good. You need to call Moshe Alpert. You need to reach out to him. You can reach out to him right now at alpertmoshe@gmail.com. If you're not sure, maybe you're not sure. Hey, listen, everyone talks about life insurance. I don't really know what I need. Then just reach out. It's free. Just ask. My finances seem okay. I'm not really sure. Another Yontif is coming up. What can I afford? Choking a little bit about it. Just ask. Just reach out to Moshe. He'll let you know what he can do for you. And I think I'll be quite surprised about what you can accomplish when you have something like that in your corner. That's albertmoshe@gmail.com. And you can also call Moshe. You can give him a call right now. 718-644-1594. That's 718-644-1594. Give him a call. This episode of Meaningful People is also sponsored by a friend, Isaac Newman. Yes, Isaac Newman. You've heard him many times on this podcast. This episode is sponsored by Zecher Nishmas, his mother, Ruchama, Perel, Malka, Leah, Aryeh, Leib, Ruchama, Leah. This episode of Meaningful People, we sat down with Rivkah Kohn, which was really so incredible. The knowledge that she espoused on this episode, the things that we need to know about kids growing up without a parent at home, someone going through loss. Doesn't matter if they lost a parent when they were 10 or 30 or 60. There is a support group for them. There are resources for them. Rivkah Kohn has a story herself. I love the story about Shlomie Gross, which is a big part of what she does, Shlomie's Club. I read that book. Huge inspiration for me. And I think you'll really, really love this episode. So listen closely and thank you for being here. You are listening to the Meaningful People podcast.
The podcast featuring our nation's most impactful, influential,
and meaningful people. We are so excited to be sitting here with Rebbetzin Rivkah Kohn.
Gewalt.
With a K, right?
Welcome.
Yes,
not with a C. Are you guys a Kohen?
So some parts of the family are and some parts aren't, actually.
Oh, really?
It's a funny story. Yeah.
All right, cool. Okay, so let's jump right in. First of all, you work for an organization.
So to preface that, I founded the organization.
It's called
Cecil's Links and Shlomie's Club. It has two divisions. We'll talk about that. But It's the girls and the boys, and I founded that in April of 2006.
Wow. It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. So what is the primary work that's done with that? And then we'll work backwards and sort of how you got into that.
Okay. So we service children and teens who've lost a parent. And really we try to provide any type of emotional support that these families may need in different capacities. So there's a host of services, but really our tagline is we're in it together. And that's our purpose, so to speak, is to just be in that space with the families. It's interesting. People say to me, but you also provide financial support. And I always said, I know, but our primary purpose was to be there on an emotional level, and whatever financial supports are needed for that emotional support, that's what we're there to do as well.
Like that's the goal.
Yeah.
I like that framework where you say we're in this together. So it's not about the targeted line item that's being addressed. It's we're there for the individual. So whatever may come up, we're there for them.
Yeah, it's funny because we actually created a program around that called the Rosh Chodesh check-ins. And I think this is something that people can do in general for their neighbors and friends as well. We started sending out emails every Rosh Chodesh to our families saying, what do you anticipate needing this month? What's not working for you? and we'll get back the simplest of requests of like a handyman service, like just like 2 things fell now in my bathtub and I have no clue how to replace them, to something more significant. You know, I need funds for dental work that's uninsured. I need this for this child, or just also a lead. I have no idea how to find this type of thing. And we really recognized is that there's no need that's too small or too big, and we try. And I'm not afraid of saying no. So I always say, try me. And worst case scenario, if I can't do something about it, I'll tell you I can't.
Right. I would imagine that sometimes it's like that small handyman need that comes up in the bathtub that when you freeze frame it, it seems insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But I would have to speculate that sometimes the void or the gap in the home is exposed by something as simple as that, and it could trigger a tremendous emotional need.
Yeah, I think that for a lot of us, and I'll say us because I guess I'll jump into it. I lost my mother when I was 9. It's really the small stuff that ends up triggering the big reactions. Like I always joke is that when I got married, everybody prepared me is that, you know, my mother won't be at my wedding and it might be very emotional. I like literally, I don't want to use the word didn't care, but I was so excited to get married and I was having a great time and I got married in a blizzard. So, hey, but
an actual
blizzard. Yes. In 03. And yeah, 03.
Oh, you better remember that date.
Yeah. No, I'm like, what year was that? That was in 03. Yeah. But yeah, it was a crazy blizzard story. But the bottom line is that I was having such a good time and I was having an amazing wedding and my mother was like the furthest thing from my mind. And then all of a sudden I'd have this like small, insignificant thing, even now as an adult with a child, where I'd be like, I don't know, what do mothers do in this type of situation? And I have no frame of reference.
Oh, because you didn't have that.
Right. So sometimes it's just like, ouch. You know, those are the moments that are the ouch moments.
So I guess I imagine, you know, losing your mother at a young age really led to you starting this organization. So I guess take us through, you know, early life. What was Rivkah Kohn like growing up? What were the challenges?
Okay.
Where are you from, by the way?
Muncie.
Nice.
I was telling Naha before, I grew up where there's Old Muncie. We were like the third from family on Carlton, which right now is a hopping block.
Now
but
it's like developments?
Probably. My
No
house
trees?
at one point was thrown down. I think there were 3 or 4 families living there. But yeah, when I grew up there, it was definitely, I remember most of the streets being paved and built. So yeah, that's kind of, it's been a while. But yeah, what was it like growing up? So I was an only child. And when I was 2.5, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. The doctors at that point gave her 6 weeks to live. And the legend goes is that my mother looked at the doctor in Mount Sinai and said, "You're not God. You don't get to tell me how long I will or won't live. Tell me what you're going to do for me." And unfortunately, that doctor went on a biking trip the next week and died in that biking trip. And she outlived him by 7 years.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was pretty crazy. Anyway, so she really forced herself, so to speak, to try anything possible to keep herself alive because she wanted to raise me for as long as she could. And she did. She did it from 2.5 to 9. I mean, she really pushed herself. And we had a real hopping house. I kind of grew up not really understanding how sick my mother was because she was crazy in the best possible way. So she was like that chaperone on class trips after chemo type of person.
Wow.
You know, almost every Friday, unless she was in the hospital, she took me and 2 friends of mine out for pizza because those 2 friends came from large families and she knew their mothers. And she was like, I'll give them a break, take 1 kid out of the house. I only have 1 kid. It's good company for them. Let's just do this. So like every Friday growing up, we went out for pizza. Me, my mother, my 2 little friends. So this
Can I just stop you for a moment? In very short order, you just shared 2 incredible stories about what sounded like an incredible woman.
The biking one.
Your mother.
That's
right. Oh yeah. The Viking one is wild.
Yeah.
But like just like chaperone on the class trip after chemo.
Right.
And then like, let me think about this equation from my friend's perspective with all of her kids.
Right.
And be there for her. Like, wow.
And she had stage 4 throughout the entire.
Yeah, she was diagnosed at stage 4, meaning say
that's where it started.
And at this point, I have to say, the prognosis for ovarian cancer is never a great one, but the prognosis those days was really not. I mean, you're talking about almost 30 years ago. So this was a definitely not the norm. And it gets better. Basically, my mother, Lashon, was born in Egypt. So I have a colorful background.
What?
Yeah, I know you didn't see that.
What
coming.
percentage are you Egyptian?
Well, her father was there. He was a fourth generation.
You're going to tell me he was like the king of Egypt?
No, not
Descendant of
quite.
Yosef?
Although our great grandfather was the chief rabbi at one point.
He was a sheik?
No, but not the sheik part, the chief rabbi part. They came from Spain.
Really?
After the Spanish Inquisition, they went through Portugal, a quick stop in Morocco, and ended up in Egypt. And that's where the family was.
You don't look sorry at all.
I know.
Joey Newcomb does that like every winter, like that exact trajectory.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Well, okay. This is where
So
they
you're
live.
Sephardi?
From my mother's side, yeah.
You're the wow. Did you
Most-
know that? Did you know that? Did everyone know that? That
no,
she's Sephardi?
nobody did. I'm telling you. I say that and people are like, how?
That's amazing.
So in 47, they had to flee. So they fled to Israel right before the 48. So they fled to Israel. They lived there till my mother was in her late teens. They moved to America. So she never had the greatest of English and stuff like that. Hebrew was always her first language. She married my father, who was born and bred in Boston, which is like,
Boston.
yeah, I mean, you couldn't get more American than my father.
Garlic knots.
And
Garlic.
that and idea.
I do.
Anyway, you could not get more American than my
Right.
father. My mother married him. That's a story for itself. But anyway, so I definitely come from that kind of colorful background. So my mother was recruited by Rivkah Kohn in Monsey to help out with women who were becoming from, this was like I don't want to call it the height of the Kiruv movement, but it definitely was at a high point in the 80s and 90s, where young women were going to these seminars, whether it was Tov, whether it was Arachim, and others, becoming from. And then it was really difficult for them because they'd go back to Tel Aviv to the disco scene. And then how do you stay from in that kind of environment? So what they felt was a very interesting model, send them to America where they're far away, but they love America. And they're living with a frum family. So they're going to actually move into a frum family's home, live there, get part of actually like preparing for Shabbos, doing the whole real thing. So you're not just like teaching halacha and hashkafa, you're living it. So you pick up nuance.
It's like a show on TLC, I think. No?
It's really brilliant at the end of the day because it's hard to teach Yiddishkeit in its full nuance
Without the integration.
Without the integration. So they would move into somebody's home, live there for a few years, and then at that point, either they went back to Israel or
a few years.
Or they would find shidduchim and stuff like that. Yeah. So we had.
I want to also just open a parentheses on the Mikam Yisrael.
Did you close the other one yet?
Yeah, the other one has been closed.
Okay, I'm just making sure.
Open parentheses. Like the Mikam Yisrael aspect, like we're thinking like, how do we improve the experience of Kiruv? And like the solution is, well, they need to live with us. Right? We need to bring them into our homes and we need to welcome them into our life. And that'll really enhance the Kiruv. Yeah, let's do that.
So
amazing.
It was also very real because they were living
Close
with real families where you don't just see the Shabbos table that you walk into at 7:30, which is gorgeous.
Right.
And you don't see that prep that happened an hour before and know that you're completely normal if you're rushed and stuff like that. So anyway, so they recruited my mother before she had cancer. And then when she had cancer, she refused to give it up. And she and my father hosted 27 girls over those 7 years.
Wow. This is while she was sick.
Yeah. So they officially came under the pretense of helping her out at home because she wasn't always able to like stand on her feet for many hours and stuff like that. So they would help with whether it was kitchen prep or stuff like that. It was a marvelous environment. So when I grew up as an only child, people are like, oh, that must have been really quiet and boring. And I'm like, my house was a scene.
27 siblings, actually.
Yes, because they got married and they'd come back with the kids and the grandkids and it would be like a whole scene going on in my house.
Wow.
And at some point, one of the girls got married and she actually lived in an apartment in Monsey that ended up having squirrels in it. And she called my mother crying and she called my father crying. And at some point they tried every type of thing and they couldn't find her another apartment. And I have no idea what went through, if this was my mother's decision, my father's decision, both of them, because they were both one of a kind. They closed off our basement. Like we had a door from the kitchen going down to the basement. So from one day to the next, I came home and there was a door up there. And this couple with their 2 kids moved in downstairs.
Wow.
So when we had to do laundry in the basement, we knocked on their door for permission.
Wow. How long are they there?
My kid's mind, it seemed like a year, but I want to guess it was probably closer to like probably 6 months. I don't know.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
But like, yeah, that was our playroom. They hung up sheets and they made 2 bedrooms for like the duration of the time that they were there. It had a bedroom, it had a bathroom, and my mother bought them, I remember, 2 little burners, and that
mother was really, really special. She really set like this foundation.
So I'm telling you, it was a very happy home, and the confusion for me eventually when she passed away was that, tell me this woman is so sick that she's dying. Does she sound to you like she's dying?
No, she's doing things that people who are healthy aren't doing.
Exactly.
Being the chaperone.
So in my head, I went to visit her in the hospital. She never kept her illness a secret. Like, this was not a secret environment. And to the point where my father really, and I tell this all the time, my father had such a shock that I was shocked. And later, as an adult, I told him once, I said, Tal, like, why didn't anyone tell me how sick she was? Like, I went to visit her, just to give you an extreme example. I went to visit her Erev Rosh Hashanah, and I brought with me like a card that we made for like the Shana Tova card, and we spoke. And I remember I sat on her bed and we spoke a lot. And she told me, I'll see you after Yantif. And she passed away on Yantif. She passed away Matzah Rosh Hashanah, which was actually Tzom Gedalia that year, was a Nitzcha. So she didn't seem to have a clue, and neither did I.
Well, she was given 6 weeks and she lived 7 years.
So my father looked at me and he said, like, what did you think all the times that, like, she just, this was, I must have been about 16. And he was like, what did you think? Like, she was going into the hospital. She didn't look great. I was like, I don't know. Kids get strep. They take medication. They're out of school for 2 days. They get better. Right. Some mothers get really sick. They go to the hospital for 3 weeks. They come home and they get better.
Well, that was your whole life. That was your reality.
This was my life, right? So I grew up very much with this kind of like dual, like, oh, she's really sick, but we're not really living in a sick house.
Mm-hmm.
So like, yeah, we had pumps, we had needles, we had medications all around. Hatzalah members were our best friends. Like, we knew this environment, but like dying, I don't know. That was not on the radar. Like, it was really not on the radar.
So it really hit you.
Yeah, it was brutal. It was brutal. It was really brutal.
Meaning sometimes and you work in this field now with kids and spouses who are, whether it's a almana or an alman, many times you'll hear, oh, so-and-so, their parent was sick for 5 years. Oh, so they were ready. They were expecting it. Not necessarily the case, you're saying, because...
So I'm a big believer in, first of all, spelling things out to kids. I really do. I can't say that any kid, you could take it for granted, knows because the situation, even if it's an open situation.
Yeah.
And then in terms of a lot of other families keep their illness a secret or somewhat secretive. And then I say it's just as good as a traumatic or sudden death. Because if the kids didn't know, or, if people in the family didn't know, then when it happens, that the reaction in terms of like the process of it is just like a traumatic or sudden death.
That part is probably like underrated. I would say when my brother-in-law passed away a few years ago, he left behind 5 kids. He was 40. It was sudden. The kids went to school, picked him up. They got picked up from school, came home, it was a shiva house. And I remember Zahava Farman came and she sat down with the kids, and in no uncertain terms, she said, your father passed away today. He's not coming home. Because she said, like, the last thing you want is this kid is waiting by the window. Maybe Mashiach's here. Maybe Mashiach's coming. My tati's coming home. Like, your father's not coming home. And so you need to, like, it sounds like a knife to the heart.
You want a challenge? You know where I gave that speech?
Where?
At the Knesset Shlochis.
Oof.
Okay. I'm telling them, I'm training. I do a lot of trainings for people in terms of people active in the community, therapists and stuff like that. And I spoke at the Knesset Shlochis. I did a workshop there. And I was really grappling with how am I going to convey this piece, which I know to be true, is that kids need to hear finality. And I've spoken to many Rabbanim about this, how and when we introduce the concept of Tchiyas HaMesim, how and when we introduce the concept of Mashiach, but especially with young children, like you said, there needs to be a clarity and a finality. Otherwise, they live a life of waking up 4 o'clock in the morning at the window or looking at a plane and thing. And the euphemisms are really a problem. Also, like when people say, oh, he went away or he this and that, it's like, okay, now my mother wants to pack her suitcase to go away. You think I'm letting her? No, she's not going away. Last time he went away, he didn't come back. We don't go away in this house, right? So people don't realize euphemisms are very scary. So I like was thinking a lot about how I'm going to convey this piece. And really, I think there's no way around it. And what I really did explain is that we do bring it up at later points, and we bring it up and I have ways that we can introduce it to children. But at that moment, they need to know finality or else.
And that's what's best for them.
Yeah, it really is, because otherwise you get such anxiety and so unnecessary. Kids really struggle enough after a loss. They really do. And, obviously everyone's struggle is different. And I always say this, I said, I run my organization, obviously using my experience as somewhat of a guide sometimes in developing a new program, sometimes of a guide in sensitivity, but I don't use it as a guide in imposing my experience on somebody else's experience, because I think there are no two grievers who are the same. I think families who've lost a parent will tell you there's no two siblings who act the same. I mean, they take it differently. So to say, oh, all grievers are like this, or all kids who lost a parent feel this, no, I'll be the first to say not true.
I heard you mention once the concept of delayed grief. Is that, can you explain what is delayed grief, and is that something that you experienced?
Yeah. So I guess I'll take you through my personal experience with that. And through that, I'll kind of show you what delayed grief looks like in a kid. And it's full of bad stories. So that's good. Basically, so I lost my mother, like I said, at the age of 9. There was no organization at that time. Like, I get adults sometimes who tell me, like, where were you when I was growing up? I said, where was I for me? So there was no organization, and there certainly was no awareness, and therapy was almost non-existent in the frum world. So we were like in a totally different era. Not even a bad era, just a completely different era. So my mother's levaya was on a Sunday. And just to say, I was in total shambles. I was bawling my eyes out. And I also ran around to tell all the neighbors that she passed away, scaring the daylights out of all of them. Anyway, but that night, my father sat down with me and he said, you're not bas mitzvah. You're not mechuyev in Shiva. You want to stay home? You're welcome to do that. You want to go to school? You're welcome to do that. I took one look at my house in total disarray and said, I'm going to school. Now, nobody thought to give the school a heads up that come Monday morning, kid is on the school bus showing up at your door.
Wow.
Think about this happening today. Wouldn't happen.
No.
So I showed up to school and nobody knew what to do. And what do people typically do when they don't know what to do? Well, either they say something really dumb, which thank goodness didn't happen to me, or they do nothing. So everybody was like, okay, she's here. She's acting normal. Let's just not rock the boat. So they didn't say anything. So I was this
Classic
entire
avoidance.
loss, if you think about it, was never, ever addressed.
Wow.
Outside of my being spoken to before the levaya, it was as though it never happened. Anyway, so for me, my experience in school was I was this exactly what you're saying now. Happy-go-lucky, easygoing, fun, crazy a little bit, or maybe a lot, and just loving everything. I was Geo, I was valedictorian, I was the choir head, I was, machering and stuff like that. And everybody just believed she must be fine, right? And inside there was this like little volcanic thing growing and growing and growing. And when I got to 10th grade, it was like an explosion like no tomorrow. You can't even imagine. So the first thing that happened was I was in camp. And this is a story that I tell that like makes people who haven't experienced this like laugh sometimes. I called the Machain Laira hotline from a payphone. For people who don't know what a payphone is, that was the phone that you stuck a quarter in and you got 3 minutes.
What about what the hotline is?
Right. And I was going to say the Machain Laira hotline was a hotline in Muncie that was staffed with Rabbanim, Dayanim. They were in, a lot of them were in training and under supervision. It was a very nice program. And they would pick up calls to answer halachic shilas, and you can ask them anonymously. I called the Machain Laira hotline. I said, I lost my mother when I was 9 years old and I never sat Shiva. I'm 15 now. I'd like to know if I'm allowed to sit Shiva now. I really want to.
Wow.
Now, I have to say that I wish I knew who the Rav was on the other end of the line. I have no idea, and I'll never really know unless they keep some logs. I'd love to know. I really would love to thank him because he was incredibly compassionate before it was in vogue. He told me, he says, I really understand that you would want to do this. That's what Shiva is meant for. Hashem created a system, and this became the basis of so much of what I teach. Hashem created a system, and that system wasn't given to you.
Wow.
But I'm so sorry you can't sit Shiva. So he gave me the psak, but with so much compassion. Yeah. It was amazing.
I'm sure that person, like that rabbi, you don't forget a phone call like that. I'm sure he remembers it. So
if you're out there listening,
you're out there, LinkedIn, right?
I don't know. Who knows? So anyway, this was kind of the beginning of the pain. And then I sat in a 10th grade classroom. This was the summer before 10th grade, I think. And then I sat in a 10th grade classroom, and I remember we were learning Parshas Yisro, and we were learning Kabed Yasavicha Ve'esi Mecha. And Rashi then says, to honor your father's wife. And my father had remarried. And I said to my friend that we were doing like Chavrusas then, and I said to my friend, she was a very good friend of mine, I said, Chani, what happens if something my stepmother friend says contradicts something my mother said? Who do I really have to listen to? klutz kasha. You know what a klutz kasha means? It never happened. And I said, I'm going to ask the teacher. And she's like, just don't. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to embarrass you. I'm not going to ask in class. I'll go to her after class and I'm going to ask the question. And I went to her after class and I said, Mrs. So-and-so, I just want to ask you this question. Like, I know this was, and I asked it in all my flippant glory. And she took it very seriously. She's like, I'm going to have to call a Rav. And I'm thinking to myself, you so didn't get what I was trying to do here. I was craving somebody to acknowledge the loss, which is what delayed grief
and you gave her the number. Like. You gave her the number for the hotline.
And she's like, I'm going to go ask a Rav. Anyway, story doesn't end yet. She comes back and pulls me out of class the next week. And she says, I actually asked a Rav. And to this day, I will not remember what the answer was because what she said afterwards was much more impactful. She said to me, this is the answer, but I don't think that's what you were asking. Score. And she said, and here's unbelievable part number 2 of her humility and her ability to zone in. She goes, I think you need to talk about this and I'm not the right person.
Wow.
And that was amazing. And then she goes to step 3. She goes, and I think I know someone who is, but I wanted your permission to do it first.
Wow, this teacher.
She knows. She knows what an impact she made on my life. She's unbelievable.
Good.
Anyway, so she introduced me to a different teacher in the high school who had lost a parent herself.
Wow.
And think about the seedlings of where Links and Shlomie's Club was planted. This is it. Of the ability to connect with another adult who'd been in that situation and got it.
It's just so amazing to see the inception of something that's having such an incredible impact with what you're doing. It came from people of authority, like teachers, just having the right answers and not trying to be the hero, but trying to do what's best for you. It could have, sometimes we can get in our head and be like, oh, I want to help because I want to, I could help the kid who lost their mother. But if you're not equipped with that, you can do more damage than help. And that's what that teacher, look what that person created in a way.
Yeah,
through you.
She really did. She really did. She's anything that I would ever do in my life, I would absolutely credit to her, and to both of them in different forms. And then I also got a pen pal in 10th grade. I met up this girl. You remember pen pals? Any of you?
Yeah. What happened to those?
Okay. Well,
now we have WhatsApp.
Yeah, they don't exist anymore. But we used to
I feel
write
like my
letters.
daughter might have a pen pal.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So we used to write letters.
Trying to bring it back.
Does she?
Yeah.
Which daughter?
I don't want to call her out right now, but I think it's a thing. And I want to give credit to my mother, who I think at my bar mitzvah spoke about the godless of a paper-mate pen. And she would correspond with her mother in Israel. She lived in Israel, moved to Israel when she was starting high school and lived there. And then when she married my father, moved to Los Angeles, which back in 1974 when they got married, that's a very, very big distance. Yeah. And there's before WhatsApp. Do you know what I mean? And
you still don't have WhatsApp.
That's the old school that I get from my mom. And she would correspond with her parents writing letters. And it was very important to her. And she passed that down to us and to our kids.
Oh, very nice.
So we're holding on to it.
Beautiful. So you got a pen pal.
So I had a pen pal who lost her mother. She was a little bit older than I was. And we corresponded, and it was really interesting to be able to write those feelings. I was a writer, and I wrote open letters that I never sent anybody. I would write letters to my mother. I would write letters to Hashem. I wrote letters to whoever I thought of that morning in that sense, but mostly the consistency was to my mother or to Hashem. And I would process my grief a lot in that way. But anyway, so it was this roller coaster ride of navigating feelings. And I could see that the overreaching feeling that most kids with delayed grief feel is a sense of shame. Because the community feels and society feels why now? Okay, wasn't that 10 years ago? And the part that nobody kind of acknowledges is yeah, but the person didn't wake up from the dead yet.
Mm-hmm.
The person's still not here. We're not back. So I know it's 10 years. If anything, to some degree, in a weird way, it's harder because it's 10 whole years. I've done so many things. There's parts of my life that obviously my loss has gotten a lot easier with because Baruch Hashem, I'm married, I have a family, I'm busy with stuff. And there's a part of me that has healed in a lot of different ways. And there's a part of me that, new parts of grief come up in adulthood. And adults like myself don't like to talk about it often. Like I'm making bar mitzvah, and I will say it's excruciating to realize that neither of my parents are alive for that. And it's just one of the most painful pieces, like to just realize. And I remember when my father passed away, which we'll talk about in a minute, recognizing kind of this line of I'm nobody's child anymore.
Right.
And it's a painful space to be in that way. And that's kind of the delayed grief piece of like moving into adulthood and moving into years. And b'chalal, the fact that kids can't process certain things when they're younger, they just can't. And when you enter into the stage of teenhood, which is identity, you know, who am I like? Who am I want to be like? What do I want to be? Who do I not want to listen to? Right. And it's like, who am I?
Right.
You know, whose child am I? What would that mean? What would they say now? And you have these opinions of the parent who passed away and stuff like that. So it's a grueling process. It really is.
We'll be right back to this episode of Meaningful People. You know exactly what I'm about to say, and that is that you need to call Infinity Land Services. If you are in need of title, which maybe you're buying a property, maybe you're buying a home, you're going to need, then reach out to Infinity Land Services. How do I reach out to them, Naki? Oh, it's so simple. Go to ilstitle.com. That's ilstitle.com. Get in touch with them today. No more horror stories. Ain't no time for that. You want to make sure that you have the professionals in your corner. You want to make sure that they got everything covered. Cross your T's, dot your I's. That comes from ilstitle.com, Infinity Land Services. Thank you guys. Reach out to them. I also want to mention, by the way, I have personally been fundraising for an organization that I am playing for, which is RSK. We had Montes Gilbert on this episode. And I told people that if you donate, I'm going to give you a shout out on this podcast. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to give a big shout out, of course, to Isaac Newman, who already got one because, you know, Schneider Silverman, who I played baseball with growing up in Camp Monk. Could he still play though? I don't know. He's a Rebbe now. So he's like the ninth man. You know, it'll be a really good story. Shimon Friedman from LBA in Lakewood. You know, you guys know LBA, right? One of the biggest sports leagues in the entire Jewish world comes out of Lakewood. And that is because of Shimon Friedman doing his work in the LBA. And Srili Saflis, you know, Srili Saflis is the one who edits all these videos. So big shout out to you, Srili Saflis, and Naomi Garfinkel, who also cuts all these clips. You guys do an incredible job making this podcast possible. And you also helped me out with this campaign. So a big thank you to you. Now back to this episode.
I remember I took an EMT course when I was younger. And one of the things that was like taught in the beginning was when an EMT suffers a traumatic situation, like let's say they're working on someone that didn't make it, or you can leave the scene feeling fine, and then 3 months later you could pass by the scene, and then you look at a car or you look at the pavement and you have like this crazy response to it. And it's just like what you don't you can't escape feelings, and you can't escape the grief in your life. It's gonna come. You could run but you can't hide, and whether it comes today or in 20 years or in 60 years, would you say that's the MS?
So it's funny that you're saying this about 60 years, because one of the things that we started this year was something that was incredible. We started a bunch of support groups. So what happened was adults would message me on Instagram and on LinkedIn of like, oh, it's so great that you're doing this for kids, but like either where were you when I was a kid, or like I just lost a parent now and I'm 33 years old, and what's there for me? Like I'm grieving. Maybe I'm not a kid, but I'm grieving. And so as like a test run, so to speak, we started a few groups, and they were so phenomenal that we just ended up starting more groups and more groups and more groups. And now they run from September to May, and they're really incredible. So we started groups for women 20 to 35 who lost a parent in the last 3 years, women 20 to 35 who suffered complicated grief, which is usually when there was a complicated relationship before with the parent who passed away. Maybe they were divorced before, maybe there was an addiction, or, you know, any type of complicated death. So kind of those pieces. And then anyway, we were starting all these groups. We had a group for men who've lost a spouse and are raising children. We started all kinds of incredible groups. Wow, really.
That's really amazing.
Yeah. And like, as we started the next group, people said, oh, you have these groups. And I'm just curious, do you have a group for me? And I'm like, put yourself on a wait list. If there's more people like you, we'll start a group. And every 3-4 people, we were like, because groups really should only be 5 to 7 people. So it was like, once we had 3-4, we made a flyer about it, and we got the last 1 or 2 people to sign up, and it was great. We had women 50 to 65 in a group who lost a parent as a child. And for the first time in their lives, possibly not the first for some of them, but really for the first time for sure in a group setting, they processed what that was like.
Wow.
And it was, I mean, that group, I must say, I got the most over the top feedback on, because don't forget, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, and if they were, let's say 10 years old, that was 40 years ago. Nobody did this. There was silence around a lot of this. And so those feelings were there. And what was fascinating to me, you're talking about years later, you're talking about these women, many of them are super successful in their professional lives, in their personal lives and stuff like that. And this was creeping up on them. And when they saw this opportunity, it was just like, I need this in my life. And it taught me so much about the gift that we're giving kids now of processing it at a younger age, so that hopefully we give them a little less stuff to take into adulthood, just a little less.
It's really incredible that, the kids growing up now, we've done a lot of episodes, and I think that, Mirz Hashem, no one should ever have to go through any of these things or need any of these services. But I think it's evident that the kids going through trauma and grief nowadays end up probably well more equipped than in the previous generation. But to me, the fact that you're doing something for those people who maybe were robbed of those opportunities to process the grief in a healthy way, that's fascinating. Yeah. It's fascinating that there's people that are willing to, I guess, dig up an old wound.
I really admire people, I have to say, because I don't know, and I'm being totally candid here. I don't know if they would offer me the group right now. Now, the truth is that I've done a ton of individual therapy work, and I've had more supervision hours than I care to admit. But I wonder if they would offer me a group right now. Would I be up to doing that work?
Would you join a group, you mean?
Would I join a group? Now, I couldn't join any of the groups because it wouldn't have been fair.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if I joined a group in Oklahoma somewhere, would I be able to join a group? It takes a lot of bravery. It really does. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of bravery. And I think every person who steps into that room, I just admire in an incredible way. I really, really do.
And some of that barrier, some of that thick skin and aversion to addressing it over the years is developed as a coping mechanism, as a survival mechanism.
Yes.
And to let that guard down and to revisit that work today, after so many years, maybe decades of protecting oneself from it, it's excruciatingly difficult.
Yeah, it really is. And it's interesting that you bring that up because, people think of denial as a horrible thing, right? People are in denial and they speak about it in a very negative
Denial
form.
is a river in Egypt.
Yeah, denial is a river in Egypt, right? All those
Back
type
to
of
Egypt. Good for you, dude.
You get it? Denial?
Yeah, I got you.
Oh, you got it?
But going full circle to Egypt.
Egypt piece. So it's interesting. I remember one time, I don't remember how I got into conversation with my husband, who happens to be a phenomenal social worker, and I was telling him something about denial, and I guess I was talking about it pretty flippantly and negatively. He's like, denial is anesthesia in a surgery room.
Mm.
He's like, too much of it, and yeah, you're in a coma. He says, but not enough of it, and you can't live through that pain. Nobody would have open heart surgery.
Such a fine line, though.
And I was like, oh. So he's like, denial's a tool. When people first go through, or when people go through any type of pain, the denial is there to protect them in some form. And that's not a bad thing, because people would literally go bonkers from some of the pains that they've dealt with. So they need to do it. And it's kind of one of the interesting conversations that actually came up on social media. And we should talk about some of the conversations we've had there. And how social media has been a tremendous tool in bringing up a lot of the grief topics that we've ended up doing. But one of the topics that came up was somebody wrote me a note about, don't hold me to what I say during Shiva. People go into Shiva houses, and I know it's a pet peeve of yours also, but there's this epidemic now of people filming people at Levias and vulnerable situations and stuff like that. And I have this hashtag for years on LinkedIn called Dignity Matters. And I will never tire of talking about it, of just getting people to be more sensitive to the fact that people deserve their privacy and their dignity.
You recently highlighted that on online when Michal Schnitzer passed away, and the fact that messages were going around. And
I feel passionately about three parts to that. One is that we have to be so careful before posting anything, even the simplest thing of just Baruch Dayanem, as somebody died, A, verify it, and B, I always try to tell people, really verify that the family was notified. Yeah. I cannot tell you how many people I know personally, how many kids were in camp or were on a trip or something like that and heard about it through a friend looking at status. And she's like, I kid you not, this is the real story. She looks at somebody's status. They were on a camping trip. and she didn't have reception on her phone. They were working then with Miss Askim to get someone to go in person to tell her because they didn't want to call her. And her friend got like service for a minute and she's like, oh my God, your father died? And that's how she found out.
Wow. That's...
And that's what she was sharing at one of our events. And she told me once, she's like, share this story wherever.
There's
I don't
a lot
care.
wrong with that story.
Yeah. So the problem is that when people do share and like they don't verify this part, but then there's the other piece of what are we sharing? And what are we becoming insensitive to? And I had a guy on LinkedIn message me when I posted once about it. And he said, I was 16 years old just a few years ago. He's a young guy in business. And he said when his father passed away, he says, and when he saw the video online of him saying Kaddish at the open graveside, he said, I realized the person had to have been standing so close to me to have taken that video. He says, until today, I don't know who it was. He said, and I don't think I want to know. He's like, but the person felt close enough to stand that close to me, but was able to do something like this. He said it felt like a tremendous betrayal.
To video the kids saying Kaddish.
So people really, unfortunately have to be a little bit more sensitive in terms of these types of things. But then there's the next level.
On the topic for a moment on sensitivity, this is just like I don't like to call it a pet peeve, but just I want to shed some more sensitivity light on it. We're very quick to send a message with an abbreviation of Baruch Dayan Emes, which is a bracha recognizing that the Eibishter does things that on the surface is din, but is rooted in chesed, and we're mavarech. We bless the Eibishter, who is the Dayan HaEmes. That's a bracha that we give to the Eibishter. We acknowledge that, but people use it as an expression of, I'm recognizing your loss. And if as far as we're able to go is do like a 3-letter abbreviation of that with BDE, then God bless you if that's all that you can do. But if you can go like one step further and maybe just not abbreviate it even, like take the minute to say to yourself, I acknowledge that there's some loss that you're grieving right now, and I'm therefore going to be matriach myself to spell out the words Baruch Dayan HaEmes instead of just sending a BDE with a crying emoji. Like, let's just shed some sensitivity on that for a minute.
It's so interesting because I want to tell you something. It's a sensitivity that I don't know that I have. And I give you credit because as I'm listening to you, I'm like, I want to try that. I really do, because I think that, we live in this rush kind of society where everything is like TY, everything. So everything became
TYSM.
Right. Exactly. And guilty as charged, listen, especially when you answer the amount of messages that I do a day, so, sometimes it does get to that point, but I think you're so right. And at least in a circumstance where you know the person, like it's one thing if you're like in a group and, okay, maybe, but I so acknowledge that and appreciate that. And you've taught me something. So I do. I appreciate
the emoji for sure has got to go.
Yeah. I will say that it's interesting because I see different people obviously responding from different generations with different ways and stuff like that. But yeah, the emoji didn't sit well with me.
So I'm still, honestly, in my head, I'm still on that story you had just said about that 16-year-old on the camping trip. That's, we sometimes hear about it, like they found out from it, but that's probably more challenging now than ever because we live in who can, break the news the fastest and everything is just out there. It's just so hard to contain a story and make sure you get to the necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we're only as good as a group, meaning to say, yeah, obviously each of us individually needs to be mindful and stuff like that. But I think also as consumers of whether it's news sites, whether it's even individual ways that we consume, whether it's on people's social media pages or stuff like that, like being mindful, first of all, of the kind of posts you like or the kind of things you participate in or the kind of things you comment on. It gives validity. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. Personally, we don't use any pictures or videos of kids or teens in any of our stuff. And it's challenged me on the marketing end of it. Like, okay, how do you tell a story without a picture and without a video? And part of what I learned is that, and I really love the platforms that I'm able to do. But part of what I learned, let's say on LinkedIn, is really a lot of, I called it hashtag Tales of a Leader. Because I'm the founder of the organization, I don't really get censored in the sense of like the kind of hardships that I get to share. So if I want to talk about the challenges of fundraising in different capacities, or if I want to say about lead up to events or how that works or stuff like that, like nobody's stopping me from doing that. So it was very intriguing to people. So I realized, why do I have to use kids or teens? I can use the lifestyle of the organization. And more than that, I created a mission statement around the fact that we are the people. Like when you want to think about us, we're the people that don't share those pictures and videos. So now, like, that's what you're associated with. So anytime there's anything that people want me to speak up about, it's adorable. Like I get a bunch of like texts from random people who I've never heard of in my entire life. So anyway, but I realized there's creative ways to do just about anything. And on Instagram, what I really realized was people were starving for grief content. Talk about that 34-year-old person, talk about that 62-year-old person, talk about the 17-year-old or maybe lives in Yehupitzville and is not ready to join anything. It's a way of connecting with people in different ways and at the same time educating the community with posts like this. So one of the things, going back to what I was saying about don't hold people to what they say during Shiva, was that somebody messaged me and she said, during Shiva, I was very holy. Like anybody who came, I said all the right things. She said, and now I have a serious problem because everybody thinks that's who I am. Mm-hmm. And I'm crashed. I'm completely not there right now. And I don't know who I am anymore because I hear the things I said then and I don't even know what I believe anymore. Like in my head, I'm a total mess. And what I helped her distill and understand was that you're both. The same way that we all have parts of ourselves, we want to call them different parts of our neshama, different parts in an IFS word, parts of self. But the point is that we all have parts of ourselves that are patient, parts of ourselves that are impatient, right? And Hashem created something incredible, is that there are many people who immediately following a tragedy or a loss or stuff like that are able to dig deep into the part of themselves that is tremendous ma'aminim, tremendous kaiches and power. And I even think about my own mother and the stuff that she managed to do. It's a certain type of spiritual adrenaline that can't be explained, right? And then there's the crash that is totally natural and normal because Hashem didn't create malachim, he created people. And if you didn't struggle at some point, right, you're probably not in touch, dare I say it. So this person, what I was explaining to her, I said, now you're experiencing the human end of feelings. Mm-hmm. I said, and feelings come in a roller coaster and in waves and in everything like that. And she really just said to me, she said, could you create an awareness though, like people should tone down the you're so special. She's like, because now I'm 6 months later and they meet me in the grocery and they're like, oh my gosh, you're so special. And she's like, I don't feel special. And right now I'm not acting special and I want to be as unspecial as they come. And she's like, I'm just a person, and a person has ups and a person has downs. And I thought that was just an interesting, thought that maybe I wouldn't have thought to bring up, but it was, awesome. She brought it to my attention. It was something there. Yeah.
Two things came up for me as you were saying that. One, it's reminding me that Nachi asked, I think, one of our guests, Rivkah Kohn, who is an incredible girl.
Rivkah Kohn.
Yeah. Who is now a paraplegic after a skiing accident, 1 minute to the next. And like Nachi was trying to bring, sensitivity to the topic and asking like, what could we be doing better? And her response was exactly what you just said. Like, I just want to be a regular person. I don't want to be special. I don't want to be treated better or differently. I just want this to not even be like a subject.
Right. And you know where that gets you into trouble? It gets you into trouble in school. Because I get calls from principals all the time of like, okay, walk me the tightrope. They want to be normal, but like I've heard you speak and you say people ignored it and stuff like that. So like you want it acknowledged, but you want to be normal. Now walk me through that tightrope.
Yeah.
Right?
Nuance.
So it's not an easy tightrope to walk. And I always say that the basis to the first thing is relationships. Like, yeah. So where it ticks people off the wrong way, I think it's where somebody didn't have a relationship with them prior to it or doesn't have a good relationship with them now. And all of a sudden now, since something happened, they acknowledge it and are there for them and want to do everything. And that sometimes, particularly with teenagers, is very off-putting. Like I remember going to a Shiva house of a teen, and I don't go to Shiva houses a lot, and we can get into why, but I don't. So anyway, I'm at the Shiva house for this teen who I knew, and she starts venting to me, and she's like, this person came and that was great, but that person, like, she's like, I have no idea when I saw her last, thought about her last, or whatever it was. And she goes, and the last time I sat in her class, she threw me out. So she's like, she came and she sat for an hour and a half. And that did not feel right for this teen. And again, teens are black and white. I'm not saying this was wrong or anything like that, but I'm just saying, this is where it is. I think when a person develops a relationship, in relationships, there's room for acknowledgement. So let's say a kid has a yard site and a teacher can pull her out of class and talk to her privately. I don't say this should be done in public, but just a teacher with a decent relationship with her, or a Rebbe with a good relationship with his Talmud, should be able to say, yard site's coming up next week, Tuesday. Do you want to do something with the class? Like, do you want to do a brachas party? Do you want to think? Do you want us to not acknowledge it at all? Like, at least ask the question.
Right.
Like, I went through all my years of school, and now granted, my mother's yard site was Tzom Gedalia, it's a hectic time or whatever. Nobody in school even knew when her yard site was. And by the way, PSA, any teacher, Rebbe, school, therapist, or anybody who is a spouse of somebody who lost a parent, just know the yard site. Not for the reasons you think. It's just because I call it yard site season. 2 weeks before, there's anxiety leading up to it. 2 weeks after, there's relief mixed with anxiety or frustration. And every year, I get hundreds of phone calls around people's yard site time of like, I think we need medication. And I'm like, are we in yard site season? If we are, give it 2 more weeks, call me back and let me know if you're still seeing what you're seeing.
Wow. It's such a practical, helpful tip, where you had mentioned earlier that sometimes people don't know what to do. So therefore, they either say the wrong thing or they do nothing. And this is such a practical tip. It's okay to not know, but just invite the person into the equation and be sensitive enough to ask.
Is it okay to ask that? Like, is it okay to ask someone, I don't know what to do right now, can you tell me?
So yes and no. I'll tell you where it gets burdensome, right? It's like you're giving them another job. Like, now I need to come up with a way to make you feel good about helping me in the right way that's right for you, right? But I'll tell you where it is
my
helpful.
Own food. I'm not going to the restaurant.
Right, but I'll give you an example. Let's say as a spouse and as a, meaning say, let's talk to adults for a second, right? If a guy is married to a woman who lost a parent, or a woman is married to a guy who lost a parent, right? It's natural to say, a week before a yard site, or a month before, or at any time that's hard, whether it's Yifsker, whether it's a hard time, or even before a simcha, following a loss or stuff like that. Or this could be true of adult friendships for sure. And then we'll go to the teens and the kids for a second. At that point, sitting down when you have a good relationship with someone, like if you have a friend, sitting down and saying, look, I don't know, but like here, and I always say, give them multiple choice. This is what I feel comfortable with. Like, you don't say this is what I feel comfortable with, but pick things that you feel comfortable, that you know all of them are good choices for you. So you'd be like, I know yard site's coming up next week. Like, would you like to go out that day and schmooze? Do you want anyone to go with you to the Beis HaChaim? Do you want me to like bring over food for the yard site Suda? Do you want me to just say a parak of Tehillim and just like not even tell you about it? Like, what do you want? And that way, 2 things happen. Either they pick from the multiple choice, or they'll give you an idea based on one of the 4 things that you just said. It's like, no, I don't need food for the yard site Suda, but my shul wants a kiddush sponsored. Could you drop off the cake? Easy, right? All of a sudden you have something. But then it comes to kids and teens, it gets a little trickier because they're much more like careful. And also sometimes you're encountering parents who aren't often comfortable with people approaching them. One of the best gifts adults can give kids who lost a parent, and I know this is done a lot now in current Shiva houses, set up an email address. Friends of the Nifter should be writing things into that email address, positive memories, pictures, videos. Kids like me grow up with nothing. Like, I don't even know who my mother's friends were. Like, I was a kid. I have no way of accessing that. And they all disappeared after my mother passed away.
Wow.
But wouldn't like seeing that maybe bring up more pain, or you're saying no, it brings
pain doesn't scare me. Meaning to say, I think
don't be afraid of the pain.
No, don't be afraid of it. Meaning say pain is pain. And also if you give that to a child, right? If there's a photo book or there's a letters book or there's an email address that they can open as an adult or as a later, as an older teen, at that point, it's a choice, right? I don't know that I would read everything in one day. I don't know that I would read it every day, but would I not love now to like, there was one woman, and that's where I got this idea, who wrote me a letter. I remember I got it as a young teenager. And she wrote it, and her first line was, you may not want to read this now, but I just want to share different things. And what was amazing about that is I didn't know my mother as an adult. So all my memories of my mother are kid version. Like, I could tell you all the fun stuff we did, but did I ever have meaningful conversations with her about almost anything? No, I was 9. So like this woman repeating a conversation that they had about something was like, oh, that's how my mother thought about this idea. I didn't know.
It's like giving you a piece to the puzzle.
Exactly. So it's a gift. It's a total gift.
It's reminding me when you shared from your husband that denial is a tool and a coping mechanism. And Nachi was saying, don't be afraid of the pain. I heard once that we're unable to numb selectively.
Right.
And when we deny certain pain and when we numb out, yes, that is sometimes a very helpful tool to endure that period of time. But if we're not unwilling to experience that pain and to allow ourselves to feel that, we can't numb selectively. So not only are we numbing the pain, but we're also numbing our capacity for joy. And we're not able to live with vitality if we're continuing to cling to that tool of denial and
yeah, 100%. And you know what it's also like? It's also like in a house where there's a leak, right? So people shut the main water valve. Then you don't get hot water, you don't get cold water. I always say this about emotions. Like people shut off, and they do. And sometimes they have to shut off for a period of time. I know I certainly do in my line of work. There's times that I just need to shut and mechanically work. COVID was one of those times. I got 396 kids and teens in a span of 3 months dumped at my doorstep.
Wow.
And I say that number like really quickly, and it's like, we can go through what that was like. And it was a helplessness. I can't even begin to tell you what that time was like. And, you know, the only one who really, I think, understood me in those moments and who I communicated with during those times was Yankee Meyer. We had an incredible relationship. Really, he was an unbelievable person. But I remember calling him. Yeah, he was something else. I remember calling him in the middle and saying, like, Yankee, what now? Like, we're both sitting here with our hands tied behind our back. Like, there's zilch we can do, and it's just like piling. And he told me then, he says, we're just going to have to keep going and doing and doing and doing. And it's like, you know, he had like 2 seconds between the 14 other phone calls that were ringing. But it was one of those moments where I had to shut off, right? But you do shut off positive and negative at the same time.
It's like shutting them in.
And at some point, one of the things that you have to do is go turn that back on without like totally opening the seltzer bottle all at once and letting all the fizz fly. And I knew, for me, that let's say after COVID, I knew like I was going to need serious self-care. Like there was not even a question in my mind. And to me, the only solution in that point, and I do weekly supervision and I do weekly therapy, and there's no function that I would be able to have in this line of work without it. But I knew at that point, I knew exactly what I needed, and it was closed off to me, and that was visiting Eretz Yisrael.
We'll be right back to this episode. Just one more thing. There is a campaign going on right now run by Tzedek Association. Now, whoa. Don't skip this. I want you to really listen closely. They are in Washington, D.C. right now lobbying to have insurance companies pay for IVF treatments. Do you know that there are organizations that are paying over $1 million a month for people's IVF treatments in the Jewish world? Now, Tzedek is taking the fight, going to Washington and trying to get insurance companies to cover that. 1 in 5 couples struggle with infertility. And for someone who struggles with infertility, to have that child, it can end up costing $42,000. Not everyone can afford that. Many people can't. And that's why Tzedek is saying everyone needs the ability, the right to these treatments, to have a child. The insurance should be paying for it. Tzedek cannot do that, though, without your help. There's a fundraiser going on right now. I myself told them I'm going to try to raise $50,000 for them. What was I thinking? I don't know. I'm thinking about the families that need this more than ever. And that's what I'm doing. So the link is in the description. Please hit that button, and whatever you got, just sprinkle a few dollars if you appreciate what they're doing. If you know anybody that would appreciate what they're doing, thank you so much. And now back to this episode.
Can you describe the fine line? I love the term you use, self-care, the fine line between self-care and selfish behavior.
Okay. So self-care, for the most part, is caring for yourself so that you're able to give to others. Selfish is when you care for yourself and exclusively yourself.
You had that answer in your back pocket.
Because I have to grapple with that.
That's ChatGPT, or is that?
I'll tell you why. I have to grapple with this all the time.
Right.
Because I do take care of myself, and I have to. And I always tell people who run organizations and are doing this kind of line of work that if you think you can just keep going and just doing, you burn out.
So can you give me an example of what's self-care and what's selfish behavior?
So let me give you the self-care first.
Sure.
So that's finding something that replenishes your gas tank and in a very real way. So again, the big ticket item for me is always Eretz Yisrael.
Mhm.
It happens to be something where the reason it's such good self-care, and it's funny, a lot of people in the industry feel this way, is because we walk the streets without knowing the problems. So I generally don't meet the people I know, and I can pretend all is good in the world. And it's very lovely to live in a certain utopia. So, I know people would expect me to say Mekayim Tzadkashim and all this type of stuff. It's all great. And really, Chas v'shalom, I happen to love Eretz Yisrael, and every inch of that land is beloved to me. Being in a place where most people don't know who you are and you don't know who people are, and walking those streets and everybody looks fine is a lovely reset to the mind. So that's like my big ticket item, and I really do make sure to do it as often as I need. But smaller ticket items, I have found, first of all, I have to remember what this app name is, but there are apps, by the way, where you can rent a hotel room for a day, for 8 hours during the day, and you get to use all the hotel amenities, and you don't even have to stay there overnight. Nice. So I could legit leave my house, pretend to go to work, and just go to a hotel room, use all the amenities.
A friend of mine wants to know what the name of this app is.
It is. I'll have to send it to you soon.
For sure, made by a Jew, by the way.
Yeah.
Sure.
So it's a wonderful, and it's terrific. And I come home and nobody knows.
That's awesome.
And it's amazing. It's just amazing. And again, it's a clearing of the mind. I love good books, so that's like the small piece. Then
what's selfish?
I don't have much commitments on Shabbos because I need to read.
Well, it sounds like it's a mindset. It's the mindfulness of what you're engaging.
So you can't really ever call someone selfish at that because you don't know what's going on in their mind.
You could, because I'll tell you, not you could call someone selfish. Please don't start calling people selfish and saying I told you to do so. But I think selfish is where people do it, and it sometimes is confused with self-care, to the point where even when brought up, like there are other needs involved. For instance, I'll give you a perfect example, right? Suppose I had this day planned and stuff like that and whatever it is, and something comes up where there is someone in my life, and I'm not talking about a random 800 number, who has a genuine need that day, right? Am I able to put even a part of me aside or delay a gratification for myself for the sake of somebody else? Or is it me and only me, and I can only see my lane? And I agree with you. It's a fine line, and I'm sure there are people who can do the same thing and it looks very different and it acts very different. But I think people get a feeling, sometimes when people are just in that mode. And I think, by the way, one thing I will say, a lot of teens who cared for a parent while they were sick or cared for the family while a parent was sick and they were too young to do it, they can look so incredibly selfish when they start putting up the boundaries of what they will and won't do. And I know this cycle, and I've taught it to people all the time, because I'll get a phone call from an aunt saying, she used to be so nice to everybody now, and she's just like, no, I won't do this. No, I won't do that. No, I won't do the next thing. It's like, can you cure her? And it's usually they need to go through, and this is true of adults as well, but it's for sure true of teens who really don't have the capacity as much for gray. They need to go through this phase until they figure out what's normal. Because what they were doing before was also not normal. Like the responsibilities that they had maybe were not normal, age appropriate, or stuff like that. And now what they're doing is kind of finding that. And finding the derech hamamutza takes time. It does. You sometimes have to go to another extreme to do it. And that, I sometimes tell them, is that selfishness to figure out how I'm going to find it in the middle. Because doing things for other people while you're really enraged, not pleasant to live with.
It's like putting diesel gas in a regular car.
Exactly.
You're not giving them what they need. I want to ask you, you have this project called Shlomie's Club. And I'm not a big reader. Like, I read so few books. Thank you to my friends at Feldheim for Art Scroll for still sending me books. I read them every day. Yes. But there is a book that my father-in-law gave me, I think shortly after I got married. And then the name of the book was Shlomie. And not until a few days ago did I connect that it's Shlomie's Club after Shlomie Gross. Shlomie Gross was a balabas who was a tremendous Baal Chesed about tzedakah, who didn't have the Zitzfleisch to sit and learn 3 Siddharim a day, but there's nothing he wouldn't do for a friend or his kids, and he passed away pretty suddenly. So I'm curious, sort of how the name of your project became Shlomie's Club. If there's how that came to be.
Yeah, there's a story.
I'd love to hear it, because I'm telling you, I really don't read, and I read that full book.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you that you're not the only one. And funnily enough, I just posted about this today on LinkedIn. I had this like
Today,
schedule.
you've been here since 9:40. You schedule, don't you?
No, I schedule in my head, but then I don't listen to my own schedule. Sometimes it's great, creative.
Yeah.
So, but I posted this morning about Shlomie because we're working up to our Shlomie's Club Shabbaton, and kind of I wanted to highlight Shlomie a little bit more. So I wrote, did you know Shlomie in your lifetime, and did you read the book? And it's amazing. I turned off my phone obviously while I'm here, but I know I'm going to go back and see even more comments. When the last I checked, there were like 20. But people really having significant impact from the book. So what happened was I had started Links in 2006, and it was started actually as a magazine for kids and teens who lost a parent. That's what it was started out. We started with 10 families, and I sent it also to rabbanim and therapists and principals in the community. And my policy then, my policy now is I only send it to a family who signs up for it. So bottom line is they spread the word, and through that, we all of a sudden were growing exponentially. A year in, girls sat around my table and said, could you make us a weekend? I'm like, why not? We could do that because we do anything, right? And I was doing this as a side job. I was teaching. Then eventually I became an editor at Hamodia and Bina, and I worked there for about 8 years, and I was doing links on the side. Like this was just a side thing from my pantry. So we were
Glad we got into that an hour into the episode.
Right. I'm like, we're almost done. Yeah. So anyway, so we kind of had this, this event, and the girls said, would you make us a weekend? And through that kind of Links started growing, and today we call it Cecil's Links, and it's named after Mrs. Susan Mann, Cecil Sarah, which was an incredible person who we recently got to name the organization after. And kind of we were running just for girls. And then when Shlomie passed away, I did not know Shlomie. I was not lucky enough. When Shlomie passed away, somebody introduced Mimi Gross, his almana, to me, and she said, I don't understand. Why don't you do anything for boys? Like she had at the time an 11-year-old son who's an awesome guy. And she said, I don't understand. Like, why don't you have anything for boys? And I said, because I'm one person and I can only do this much. And she said, well, I'll partner with you. And she named the boys division Shlomie's Club.
Wow.
And she was like, this is the club Shlomie would have loved. And we started with just a couple of events. And at the time we started with boys. Interestingly, the girls program started with teens. The boys program started with younger boys because it was actually a couple of the men's, my husband and others, insight. Girls can come from many different backgrounds as teens and connect. You meet them at a simcha, they're talking to each other. Guys, if you're not wearing the same hat, it's a little challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we stink.
But if you get them at a younger age, then when they're teens, they're good.
The bond will remain.
Yes. So we started Shlomie's Club with kids 6 to 12. And right now we service through age 22 because our little boys have grown up.
Oh.
And even though there's a lot of new teens who join as teens because they only lost a parent at 13, at 15, at 17, the core became normal. So we had our Shabbaton this weekend. We order every different nusach siddur that exists. People can request. We have all different types of shchitas that we serve.
You have Yapchik?
We have Yapchik.
Okay, I'm in.
We serve Beit Yosef shchita. We serve Lubavitch shchita. We serve Hasidic shchita. We will accommodate anything so that any kid can attend. So yeah, so it started with that. And after that, I read the Shlomie book. I'm trying to figure out. I think it came out right after we founded Shlomie's Club, actually, or maybe it was right before. And I remember like thinking to myself, first of all, kicking myself. Like, how did I not know Shlomie before? Like, this was just incredible. But really, I have to say that Mimi's created a legacy for him that's unbelievable because we go to his friends and they're like, I want to be part of something Shlomie was part of, like named for Shlomie, because Shlomie didn't only give. He like got the entire, like it was scary to sit with him at a wedding table.
Yeah.
Because like his friends all joke. Like we sat down and he'd say, I just made out a check for $10,000 to this guy. Everybody in to do the same? And they were like, that's how you went to a wedding with Shlomie, but everybody loved him. Or like he would make a parlor meeting in his house. He'd put out chocolates and nuts on the table, nothing fancy. And he'd say, guys, we're here to make money, the most money possible. Everybody just take out your checkbooks and like do your thing. And it was unbelievable, like to hear the story. So every time we go, I thought we heard all the Shlomie stories in the world. And then the book came out and all of a sudden we're meeting a young generation who's like Baal Batim, who are like, I needed this in my life. And like, this is my Shlomie impact. Like just this morning, somebody sent me a text when I posted this on LinkedIn, is that she read the book. And after that week, she was called to school about her very, Baruch Hashem, active child. And, you know, she was getting quite frustrated with him, obviously, and stuff. Again, I don't remember the details of it. But the bottom line was that because of the Shlomie book, she just was like, he's going to rock the world. So he's awesome. He's going to do great things. And I really give Mimi and the family a lot of credit is that they did not censor the book in the sense of they presented the whole Shlomie.
It wasn't a Gadol book. It wasn't like
right. And you know what? That was I think also very fresh for a lot of people who were just like they could identify with somebody normal who loved to borrow his friends' cars and drive as fast as he could. Like, just the
maybe that's
fun.
why my father-in-law gave it to me.
They just thing, it was one of these books that it was relatable and he was incredible. And really, I say this all the time, but I'm so lucky. I went to his caver a few years ago, actually for the first time. Funny, I've been to Eretz Yisrael so many times. It's buried on Har HaZeisim. Not easy to get to Har HaZeisim, but now that I figured it out, I'm like, I don't let a visit go by without going there. And then I go to Har HaMenuchos where our other division, which is Little Links of Pearls, our elementary school girls, it's named after Mrs. Perel Benish. I don't know if you knew who she was, but she was a Holocaust survivor, an amazing woman. Anyway, so I go to their kfarim there and I'm the weird person who leaves like publications. Like we have a Shlomie's Club Gazette. I leave it at Shlomie's Caver. I'm like, read it in your spare time, But I go to cemeteries, but halal, I talk like to my parents. This is the way I talk. My father passed away a few years ago from Alzheimer's. And I am like as open as anything with my parents. So I say a kapitel telem, b'mchila, I say like maybe one or two very short kapitel, and then it's just like we got to have a conversation about what's going on and what you thought was okay. And most of the time it's like you thought I can manage this part of my life, I didn't, and you got to go plead my case because I'm not doing this. So anyway,
sounds like you'd be amazing at this, by the way.
Possibly. So I went to Shlomie's caver and I told him, I said, your legacy hasn't ended. It hasn't. People continue to read the book, be inspired and stuff like that. And you have a whole young generation of givers
just getting started
that just like, this is what they're doing. And you've left that legacy for them. And that is, we went to his caver. I have to say this. I was just at his caver now and I met this guy there. And he's like, I don't know who's buried here, but I've never come here and there aren't people here.
Wow.
Really? It's pretty incredible.
That's really amazing. I was blown away. There's so many stories in that book about Shlomie Gross and like you described, he was one of the people that the Aniyim in Eretz Yisrael were like, he would come and they would all like want to pick him up from the airport. Besides for he would help them out financially, just the friendship, what he gave.
He's very real.
He didn't just give the check, he gave the slap on the back, the food.
Can I speak to that for just 1 second and say that I do fundraising, okay? The budget is $3 million and it's not so common that a woman is a fundraiser. And I am. And I've spoken about this publicly about what it's like to fundraise from the other side of the mechitza. And it's got its fair set of challenges because I don't get a chance to have access sometimes to people. Just I can't, so if I call and they don't pick up, where am I meeting them? Not in shul by Shachars. So it has its extra set of challenges, but Hashem has always been incredibly kind to me and incredibly good to me. And I try. But I have to say that now having sat in so many people's homes and living rooms and waited in people's offices and in the backs of shuls, and I can't even tell you what I've done to get a check. I have newfound respect when I read the book of the lengths to which Shlomie went to make the person collecting, whether it was for themselves or for an organization, feel good about it and feel like they were doing him a favor. Because I always say that when it comes to like the Yom Naram davening, Kan Hadefek ala Pesach, I mean, I'll be that way. When I ring that doorbell, I have my heart pounding so fast, and it's a very scary thing, and it's not easy, and it makes me sometimes leave my family for a while and stuff like that. And it's challenging.
There's a guy, Avi Zellinger, awesome guy. He wrote and released a song about exactly what you're describing.
I need to.
Of the experience of the one that gives and the one that is collecting. And he beautifully paints the picture of the process that each one goes through and how each one is actually helping the other. And with the door swinging open and the guys walking through the rain, and it's like I broke down, lost it.
Wow.
Shout out to Moshe Bruckstein, who's his father-in-law.
I have to listen to this
introduced me to him.
This is just so the story of what I could say, and maybe I'm coming on the heels of, we're coming up to a Shabbaton, so I like hustle like a maniac. We just wiped out my bank account, Baruch Hashem, over Pesach with like $250,000. So like, we just run money and, it's like, oh, she'll just feed the meter tomorrow. So it's like kind of, there's this extra sensitivity when you read the book. And I have to say that like, Mika Amcha Yisrael to me is not a like hashtag. I see it every day. Like I go into people and I'm thinking to myself, like, where in the world do you have a society, a community of people who will meet me because their friend said so? And then I come in and I walk out with something so incredible. And I think every check is incredible. I do. Like people say to me sometimes, like, do you have an expectation? I go in with zero expectations because I truly believe that every person will give me whatever is they want to give and whatever speaks to them and whatever Hashem puts into them in that moment. But I think that I've been so lucky that I've encountered like the best of society. I really do. I feel that way. So lucky.
It's so interesting because like I too am in like fundraising and meaningful at the organization, and like it is the most I'm getting anxiety even thinking about it, having to make that phone call or go into that meeting and what makes it feel so amazing and so worth every second, besides for obviously the impact, is being able to meet the people like a Shlomie Gross or like a Moshe Majeski or Jack Friedler, who I have, that they write you a check and they make you feel like you're doing them the biggest favor that they're able to give, right? Like
it's something people should realize.
If you're a giver out there, it's like whatever, like forget the money you're giving, it's how you give it. It's so much. I
have to also say that I recently had an encounter, a meeting, which was something so special. We have a team called Legally Links. We didn't even get into a quarter of the services, but we have a team. 2 guys were working at Goldman Sachs. One man in particular, shout out, I'm sorry, he'll have my head, but Daniel Dinesh, they were working at Goldman Sachs. He called me up in September of 2019 and he said, there's got to be more.
Wow.
What can I do with my skill set? And he's a lawyer and he brought in other people. Well, he started with him and one other person. And they said, let's help people with, I guess, put it out to your families if they need any legal or financial advice or help. We'll be there. We'll help them pro bono. I said, okay. It was kind of one of these things that I was skeptical, like how far will it go? Fine, but let's try. Then COVID came. And unfortunately, people who passed away very, very suddenly, a lot of their wives had not a clue where they banked, where they had investments, where they had debt, where the mortgage was, or what the passcode to the ATM card was. They had not a clue.
Wow.
They got so busy with forensics of like, let's dig up and give people answers before they get themselves into trouble. And then it was like, let's file people's Social Security survivor benefits, because all of a sudden, if you have a guy who's 24, who didn't work for 10 years, who officially you're being told can't get, but they figured out a way to do it legally.
That's awesome.
All these types of stuff. So they were building. So they're now a team of, I want to say it's 14.
Wow.
You're talking about people who are top of the line in their fields, who are dedicating their time to do this pro bono. And anytime I speak to them, and I try to thank them as much as I can. They file people's taxes. You cannot even begin to imagine what these people do. And sometimes also they just get involved in very complicated situations, and being able to tell you if your brother-in-law's cousin is giving you the right advice about that trust or that estate or that, or what you're doing with your life insurance policy. Anyway, or how to handle the guys who may be holding on to the Karen and not giving the person the right leeway with it. So anyway, every time I thank them, and I get from all of them in different forms, just the belief that it's a gift for them to be able to take a skill set that Hashem gave them and use it for the benefit of the klal. And it's so amazing when you meet people like that.
So Meister is also not just for money, it's for time.
Yes, 100%.
Ashreinu ma tov chalkeinu.
It really is.
Rivkah Kohn, thank you so much for joining us here on the Meaningful People podcast. Really appreciate it. The work you're doing is unbelievable. Hatzlacha with the Shabbaton. I'm sure it's going to go amazing. By the time this airs, it would have it's past tense. Shabbaton was off the hook. It's crazy. And that person wrote you a $500,000 check.
On the spot?
Amen. Yeah, by the way, I just have to plug this for a second because I just have to say in the Mikam Yisrael vibe here, and then we'll close with that. We have a chat called Opportunities. Because one of the things I fell on my head one day is that I'm not asking for a donation. I'm giving you an opportunity. You want to take it, like almost like an investment. You want to have it? Great. Not, it's okay. So we have a lot of small stuff that comes into the office where people have requests, and I'm like, I can't, like, how much more? I know it's only $500 now, but if I do 10 people's $500 right there in a week, it's $5,000. So I post opportunities, no details, no anything. It's a WhatsApp group. It's admin only. So people DM me privately and say, I'll take X. And sometimes it's like, they'll take part of it. Sometimes they'll take full or whatever it is. And it's incredible to see how in a year since we put it up, we raised over $100,000 on this chat from little guys
No way.
who just say, I'll give $18 towards this. I'll give $100 towards the utilities this month. I'll do this, whatever it is. And bam, we're able to scale and do for people 100 times more. It's unbelievable.
Gewalt.
It's amazing. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And thank you so much for providing my family with the most meaningful content every month of Shabbos.
Of course. Thank
Treat
you.
to be here.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Meaningful People podcast. It was so much fun sitting down with Rivkah Kohn. She really is an expert at what she does. Happens to be, she mentioned on this episode, one of those like fundraising groups that she's been able to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars from on WhatsApp. So I joined that group and I see she'll post like, hey guys, we have a new family that can afford mezuzahs. They're moving into a new house. Anybody want to sponsor them? And people will just go like, I'll put in 100, I'll put 200. And it's amazing how these opportunities are raised like that. I'll ask her permission if I can put that link in the description of this episode if it's like open to the public. But I just wanted to say what she does is super important. I think there are so many nuggets that we need to listen out for in this episode, the way to treat these kids, the way to deal with these kids, and really the ability she has to heal hearts, the ability that people have to heal each other by talking to each other no matter how old they are. That is incredible. So thank you so much, Rivkah Kohn, for coming on this podcast. We have more episodes coming your way, and we have a new series, part of Meaningful People, that Emirz Hashem will be launching right after Shavuos, Motzei Shavuos. That is the plan, a different type of episode. So stay tuned. Make sure to follow us on Instagram. We got all the good stuff on there, clips, behind the scenes content. We love you, and we hope to see you again real soon. Adios, amigos.
Hope you enjoyed this video from Meaningful Minute. We have so much more content for you. You may like this. You may like this. Take your pick. Let us know what you think.